great seeing you, my friend, and especially because really, in a lot of ways, the last time we spoke, but in a lot of ways, the last time I saw you, I was in the audience of probably one of the best shows I had seen in that year. This was before the pandemic, so at least I could have some fun. And it brought back so many memories for me, great music, and of course, a tribute to really the greatest band of all time. And, you know, people can argue about that, but I think facts are facts when it comes to that. I heard it's coming back as things are opening up. This show is coming back. What a salute and what a way to celebrate our opening. Folks are probably wondering, what is he talking about? It's got a lot to do with the mug that you had when you were just drinking and the shirt that you have on right now.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Rudy. This is great. I always love talking about the show, and thank you for coming to see us. I believe that was at what used to be called the Sony Center, and I remember it as the O'Keefe Center. And
Yeah, we can keep going with all the names.
yeah, with the Hummingbird, it's the Meridian Hall now. Yeah, and that was a lot of fun, and it kind of was a very abrupt stop, wasn't it? At the suddenly 2 months after that, everything went completely hit a brick wall, and we had just finished a gig in Busch Gardens in March of 2020, and we got back to Toronto just under the wire, just as they were closing the door at the border, saying, "Well, if you're coming in from the U.S., you're going to have to take isolation here and go check into a hotel." Of course, back then there was no vaccine either.
Yeah.
But um, it's interesting, and I don't want to do all the talking because I know you're going to ask me a couple of questions, but it's interesting that we are back at it now. But to tell you the truth, from my position, we actually haven't been away from it because what I have done is silly me, I've taken advantage of this time. 2 years, it's like, wow, it passes by in a heartbeat. But
Mhm.
I've taken those 2 years and um, I've revamped a lot of the screen show. I've made it into 4K for one, and for another, so the is now brilliant eye candy. Um, and I have also added some more screen components with some new and wonderful videos. Um, there's always a lineup. The lineup in the show just keeps getting bigger and better. It's the same people are the core of the lineup, but as things move along, we find ourselves, well, we have to have substitutes because when you have 14 people in a show and you have things going on in the world that sometimes are out of our control, I had to make sure that I had substitutes to do all the other shows. And I just wish I could clone myself sometimes. Like if I had three clones of me, that would be perfect. Then it would be the threes show, not the ones show. But I'm doing all the talking, and I know you want me to talk, but ask me a couple of questions.
Well, the question, of course, is again, people are wondering, what are they talking about? What is the show called and what is it about?
Okay, the show is called Ones, and the premise of the show is that it's based on the number one hits of the Beatles, and that means the songs that went to number one, um, not only in Canada and the U.S. and Britain, but on a global scale. And I managed to find about 27 of those. And so it's called Ones, the number one hits of the Beatles. There's the tagline that goes with it. Um, and what it is it's a chronological presentation. So we start with the first single that was a hit that actually went to number one, and there's a narration that follows the show, so that as songs are introduced, the narrator gives you a little bit of the background of the song, or a little bit of the background of the Beatles, or a little bit of background of that time period. Uh,
Nice.
as like what was 1967 really like, and some of it's pretty humorous, as you might remember. And some of it is pretty serious because those were serious times as well. We're going through some turmoil back in the '60s that's not unsimilar to some of the turmoil that we've been going through in the last few years here in North America again. But look at the segue, and that's why it's a perfect time for the Beatles. Um, Gauged by the my personal, like the whole thing was kind of based on my personal story with the Beatles. So the narrations are colored because I lived through those times. I was literally 11 years old when the Beatles, played Ed Sullivan, and I lived through that time period. I have a personal recollection, and I was very in tune with the way audiences were responding to the Beatles at that time, and so I have colored the presentation, the narration, based on my own personal experiences and what I found to be important. But you know, people seem to agree with me. Anybody that was there, as the first line of the first narration of the song, of the show, it says, "If you were there, and you remember, you judge your experience of the '60s based on three questions: Where were you when Kennedy was shot? Where were you when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon? And where were you when the Beatles played Ed Sullivan?" And the reality is, as you said earlier, that that particular presentation and all following presentations from 1964 until 1970 had the Beatles in the front row of everybody's living room.
Yep.
I mean, everybody who followed them, not just simply because they were giggly teenagers, like the way it started, but as they sophisticated, so did their audiences. And then they became trendsetters of clothing styles, attitudes, the fight for peace, and they went from this, this sort of fun thing that like the Backstreet Boys type of fun type of a thing, into this very influential and world conscious thing, and they did that via this group of songs. And so those are the sorts of things that I bring to light within the show. So the narrator brings those to light, and the show is patterned in such a way that it really does spark the nostalgia. But even if you weren't there, you get to understand a lot of how that giant wave of Beatles happened all over the world.
How difficult is it though to sing those songs? I mean, for us, we know the lyrics, we know the songs, but for you and your performers on stage, that's a whole different story because we expect to hear the Beatles.
Well, let me give you a little bit about my background first, and then I'll precede my way into how difficult is it to sing those songs. I have worked my entire life in the music business. I've had my own recordings, and I've been a touring act, and um, I have also worked as a studio engineer. So a lot of the things that I know about the things behind the scenes, so a lot of people will go to see a four-piece Beatles band, and that four-piece Beatles band will represent the music the best way that they can, sometimes with backing tracks and things like that. But when you know a little bit more about recording, you start to realize that there was more than just three vocalists in the Beatles, because they doubled their own voices. They went in and they did five-part harmonies. They were, McCartney was very influenced by the Beach Boys, and he was very jealous of what the Beach Boys could do, but they didn't have four vocalists or five vocalists in the Beatles, so they used the marvels of technology at the time to overdub themselves. Now, when you get down to how do you best represent the music of the Beatles, because we don't wear wigs and we don't speak in phony British accents and we don't wear the suits, and nothing against that presentation, that has its place. This presentation is all about recreating the music in the most accurate way we possibly can. And to that end, we have five vocalists in the band, and we're able to then start to present some of those rounds, like you do something like Paperback Writer. It's a five-part harmony in Paperback Writer. You'd be hard pressed to do that with three vocalists live anyway. So we also maintain a very large string and horn section so that we can do the live parts again. There's no pre-recorded stuff behind us. There is nothing, I won't default to some of the adjectives that you could use to describe that, but basically we don't play with tracks. We play with live musicians. And, for instance, October 21st, we're going to be at Roy Thompson Hall. And and I know you're going to want to come, Rudy. So
Um, I was going to talk to you about that after the interview, but oh yeah.
since I've mentioned it, I know you're going to be there. Um, and on Roy Thompson Hall, we're going to have an orchestra of probably 28 or 30 musicians behind the six-piece core band. So we have like three guitarists in the band for guitars, where the Beatles only live used two, but a lot of times they would double track. They would play a lead solo and there would be a rhythm part and there would be another part going all at the same time. Again, that's hard to do with a four-piece band when there's only two guitar players. We've taken apart the music and learned it the way we would have learned it if we were actually going to recreate the recordings. So some Beatles presentations, they recreate the live presentation, and ours recreates the recording, and we try and get to as close to what the Beatles were doing in the studio at that time. And also to that end, again, because there's no end to a show this large, so I have to keep going. Um, we use 28 guitars in the show because we're playing a chronology from the very beginning to the very end. And they changed guitars as they were going along. They changed to different types of guitars, and they played them, sometimes in groups of three, where George Harrison would have two slide guitar parts while a rhythm guitar part is going in My Sweet Lord. Now, you can't do that with two guitarists. So, but that's what we do with the three guitar players. We were able to recreate a lot of those tracks. And the 28 guitars means that we're actually authenticating a lot of the sounds that they had with the period correct instruments.
One of the things that I remember about the show, which is an amazing show, and again, no disrespect to any of the other shows that are out there, I've seen them, and I actually believe yours is the best that I've seen.
Well, thank you.
The crowd itself, very emotional when they see this. And I remember seeing either everybody's of course singing and they get excited when they hear a certain song.
Yeah.
But I saw also people crying, and not crying like, bawling, but tears coming down their eyes too.
Yeah.
People get very emotional seeing and hearing this show.
Well, again, some of that is sparked by the music itself. Because if you live, again, if you live through that time, that music will take you to a place. But also because I'm amplifying the effect of that music with what's going on the screen. So the images that are going on the screen are also based on that time period. Sometimes it just, as I say, because I lived through it, I'm actually building my own experiences up on that screen and by presenting the songs. Um, it's quite emotionally moving. I have again, it's hard for me to spot people from the stage. I never see anybody sleeping, so that's a good thing. And but later when I see some of the video that's been shot, and I see people with Kleenexes cleaning their eyes, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, That's how I felt when I was writing and so to have gotten to that level of emotion, I think that's where this show succeeds. And thank you so much for saying it's the best show. It's certainly the show that I wanted to see. When I created this show in 2015, I started writing it, and our first performance was about a year later. So when I created it, I created the show that I really wanted to see.
I'm just curious, has Ringo or Paul heard about the show? And if so, have they commented?
I don't know if Ringo or Paul have seen the show. We had a circumstance where we were trying to work with Julian Lennon a couple of years ago, and he had a chance to review the show, and he liked it very much. There was, a period of working where we were getting ready to work with Julian Lennon, and then COVID. So that
Oh,
didn't work out. Um,
oh.
in any case, I'm sure we'll revisit that. Other Beatles based is Peter Asher from Peter and Gordon, who's Jane Asher's brother, very good friend of Paul McCartney's. He loves the show. He's seen the show, and he loves the show, and so he has nothing but great things to say. In fact, he's already asked if he could be in the show. So, um, no, I'm not turning anybody down these days. But anyway, uh, I certainly hope that Paul McCartney or Ringo get a chance to see the show. That would be fabulous. I would hope that one day, that's my dream, right? My dream is that one day I'd be able to play with one of them or both of them or any of them or etc.
It would be amazing. And also, if you guys could get Julian, I met him many years ago. I did an interview with him.
Mhm.
Such a great person. And, wow, what a talent. What an incredible
Well,
talent.
just on the side of Julian, I mean, he has an art exhibit, and we were looking at working as using his exhibit as part of our show, and he was very very in tune with that. But again, there's a lot of machinery that goes with that we build up momentum, and then momentum stops, and then people move on. I mean, everybody has moved on these days. um, but getting back to your original point as to coming out of these 2 years and being able to survive and move forward, we're currently uh, we're currently working on dates in the U.S. So there's a tour going in the U.S. And that'll be for next year. For this year, we're kind of culminating the year in and around Ontario, largely because we couldn't travel anywhere. The show's based in Ontario, but we couldn't travel anywhere. So everything has been focused on, well, how do we keep the show rolling, and what kind of shows can we do? And the the enthusiasm has been spectacular. We booked a show in St. Catharines for as coming up on April the 7th. Um, and it sold out in 3 days. So we added a second show. And so the second show is on April the 8th. And then on April the 9th, we're in Kingston. And that show sold out in a week. And so we added a second show. And that second show is on April the 10th. It's a Sunday show. And all these shows are near capacity at the moment. So it's like unbelievable. Shows that are selling for November of this year are showing already like seat sales that are really unprecedented for us. So we're kind of excited that not only are we coming back, but our audiences are coming back as well. That's really great. It's great to know that there's still Beatles fans out there.
Do you think that has a lot to do with the pandemic when I say that? Because I know during the pandemic, I was literally going back and I was looking up music from the 60s, 70s, 80s,
Yeah,
and some 90s,
yeah.
like literally. And as I talked to other people about this, they said the same thing. they said to me, which I have to agree and see if you agree with this or not, it was like we were going through such a rough time. We were looking for those songs and music and artists like the Beatles that gave us those good times.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When you think about music that is colored towards a feeling of happiness, um, this is it. This is the best music of maybe certainly of our lifetime, but maybe of the past century in terms of songs that touch people emotionally in a happy way. And even their sad songs are happy. You know,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
there's a there's just this feeling of course, the prevalence is always love. You know, everything is all about love, but they exploited the word. But my feeling is they really exuded the intent of that word, and so yeah, I think that's what, to quote another 60s song, what the world needs now is love.
God, I listened to
Yeah.
that song too, man. And I'm not lying. I listened to that too. I
Yeah.
said from the beginning of this, and I said, yeah, people can argue about it, but I think they were the greatest band of all time. Do you agree or disagree with that? And it doesn't matter about how long they were together that
Yeah.
we knew them, but I'm just looking at the content of work and the sophistication of it, and also the fact that those songs have been resung by so many other artists.
Well, the songs certainly have survived the 50-year mark. You'll hear songs from very early Beatles right through to very late Beatles all the time. So, were they the greatest band of all time? Yes. I mean, there's hands down, if you include in the band category, not just their live performances were pretty special. I got to agree. But, even they said they had to get off the road because they couldn't even hear themselves. So their quality of their live performances versus the ability to be at the event, so for people that were at the event, that changed their lives. But it didn't necessarily change their appreciation of Beatles music, but it did change their lives just simply because this was a first for this type of a concert where people would just like go crazy. But I think they really came into their own. Um, when they managed to spend their time in the studio and start to use the studio as both a writing tool and as an instrument. So they were able to take things like backward tape recordings, special sounds. I mean, they're the first instance of a Moog a Moog, but a synthesizer being used on a any song was on Maxwell's Silver Hammer. So they would use mellotrons before anybody else was using them. They they had this sense of adventure. And one of the things that always struck me about John Lennon, and maybe the reason why they were so progressive, is because he made it a point never to repeat anything that had already been done, that they had already done, because they certainly weren't looking too far around. I mean, yeah, they were taking in what was going on around them. They loved Motown, and they loved the Beach Boys and stuff, but they were forerunners. They were flagship musicians. They were right at the forefront. They were on the edge of the knife, and they were creating songs. And when they created something, like other bands would turn around and say, well, that was really successful, so we need to do that again. But John would say, well, that was then, and now we're different people, so now we're going to do something completely different. And so that's how you got like the diversity from going to Rubber Soul to Revolver to Sergeant Pepper, all these recording studio years. Just suddenly they blossomed into very mature, sophisticated songwriters. I honestly believe that their songs will last forever.
And just, I know we're going to run out of time, but just curious, I want to ask you, Sergeant Pepper's or White Album, which is the greatest album of all time for the Beatles? Because I always
Uh,
have a flip between the two.
that's a really good question. Rudy, I got to hand it to you. You ask the best questions. Um, I am going to say that Sergeant Pepper's for me. And the reason Sergeant Pepper's for me is because at the White Album was pretty close to the point where they had started to think and create independently of each other. So George would come in with a song, his songs, and John would come in with his songs, and Paul would come in with his songs, which is kind of how they always worked before. But they also worked, in a tight net. With Sergeant Pepper's, it was like they were all in the studio. They were bouncing ideas off of each other constantly, and even if they were bringing in their own material, they shaped their material together. I didn't tend to feel that that's what happened with the White Album. And it's wonderful. I mean, don't get me wrong, the White Album contains some of the best music of all time. It's funny that you mentioned those two albums as well, Rudy, because neither of those two albums yielded a number one hit.
It's interesting. I never
Isn't
thought
that
about that.
interesting?
That's
Yeah.
interesting. And also we also have to remind people too, which I always love the story, the fact that as you mentioned when the Beatles performed on the Ed Sullivan Show, the crime rate went down while they
Right.
performed.
Right. And not to mention the All You Need Is Love, the first world broadcast, was played to over I can't remember 400 million people or
Oh,
something like that
crazy.
across the world. And it's the very first of its kind. Again, as I say, forerunners on the cutting edge. So
Incredible. Incredible. When is the tour, as we speak, when does the tour kick off?
April 7th, St. Catharines, 2 nights, April 9th and 10th in Kingston. We will be in Ottawa for 3 nights starting April 21, 20, yeah, 20, 21, 22, or 20. I don't have it all
It's
in my
okay.
head. We'll be in Kitchener in May at the Center in the Square. And we're going to do some Muskoka shows this summer because we love Ontario too. And then we're all primed up for the Meridian in October. That's a kind of a headline. We've got 2 nights in Burlington in November. We will be as well in Brockville and Belleville, to my understanding. Although these dates are not on my calendar yet, my understanding is that they are coming. And yeah, and as we're booking right into next year. So next year you can expect us at the Living Arts Center in Mississauga,
Nice.
and I believe the Oakville Theater, and obviously not within a week of each other because they're so close. And the Richmond Hill Theater again. So that kind of covers off the Ontario area. We're working on the entire East Coast all the way down to Florida by this time next year, and across the U.S. So, got our fingers crossed that everything stays. The last time that we hit a brick wall, please, last time.
I love this. My friend, thank you so much for doing this interview with me.
Rudy, thank you.
Amazing show. I cannot wait to see it again. This has been great. Thank you again for this great, great experience and great
Thank you, Rudy.
memories.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.